What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to TOJ. I'm your host, Will Parkinson, at WillPod11 on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Hosted all 32 Pod, TOJ Talks. Got a lot of jobs these days. It's Patriots week. The Jets are 1-1. Got a big matchup here in about 36 hours or so. Devin McCourty hopping on. Jets fan favorite. We are going to make Jets fans love Devin McCourty. Devin, how are we doing today, man?
I'm doing good, man. I'm happy I can come because I know you're on there with Mike Girardi, and I know how much of a pain he can be. So hopefully this is like a bright spot, so you don't have to, you can be a little more happier when you go and deal with Mike.
I know I unfortunately said yes to going on the Six Rings pod today and doing a pod with Mike, and I'm doing a pod with you. This is horrible. But no, it's obviously this rivalry is a little different than, not that you've been retired that long, but it's a little different. Obviously, no Bill, no Brady, no guys like yourself, no Rex, the Rexes of the world that kind of really bought into this rivalry a little bit, even, as going further back. I guess before we kind of even touch on these two teams so far, how much of a rivalry really is this? Because I think Jets, Bills, Dolphins has kind of been hyped up right now because of the back and forth. Even though it kind of feels a lot like Jets Patriots, where the two teams don't like each other, and two fan bases don't like each other, but one team seems to always win. How much for you was this a actual legitimate rivalry, or is it just New York Boston?
I think it's all of it. I think it's New York, Boston. I think people, they love, like, this is the closest you get, even though, like, the Patriots aren't in Boston and the Jets aren't in New York. But it just, I think it brings that rivalry out. And I think, especially in the era where I was there, where you had Rex and you had Bill and you had, like, this one coach who didn't say a word, just went about his business, but you kind of got a vibe that he didn't like the other coach. And the other coach said how much he respected him and then took shots at him every chance he could get. It was fun. And I think even though, my time in New England, like, we dominated, but like it wasn't like just wins and losses. In 2009, the Jets go to AFC Championship. My rookie year, the Jets beat us in the divisional. So we split the series that year 1-1. And like, even though the next year we came back and we beat, like, but that stung because it was like they beat us in the playoffs where we were 14-2 that year. So I think all those moments like led into even more of a rivalry of like when you won and how you won certain games. Like, I'm sure for the Jets, like the butt fumble, like, yeah, we lost, but it was like that memory of that play which stung. And then 2015, we have a good team that year. We have a couple of injuries, go down to MetLife, overtime game. Quincy Enunwa takes one like 70 yards. Like, all of those moments, like, you can still remember. And I think that's what led into that rivalry of maybe we were doing really good in the season and we have to go to MetLife and they beat us, or, they're not doing as well. And then we play them and we drop like 40 on. It was like those like stingers that led to it. So I always thought the rivalry was awesome in it, but I always try to remind people, like, in professional sports, and each guy's different, but most guys, even though there's like this rivalry, there's no like, I'm not going to go play for that team. I'm not like a small sample of guys say that they'll never play for a team. But a lot of guys are like, I don't know, maybe my position coach ends up there as a coordinator. Like, I would definitely go to like that part of it. To me, is not, that's more fan base. Like, fans are more into that. And I think as a player, we always respect that a fan is going to be like, hey, I'm a Jet fan. I love Revis, but when Revis went to New England, like, I didn't cheer for him. I get that aspect of it because that's your team.
Yeah, no, look, I think the rivalry kind of, at least for me, I mean, I'm 30 years old. So from what I can remember, 99 was the first time Yankees Red Sox kind of got back to being insane. Obviously, we can go down the list of all the crazy stuff. And obviously, Bledsoe and Brady and 9/11 and all these different things. And like that obviously kind of kickstarted it right into when the Yankees Red Sox was insane. Nick Celtics was obviously a big deal. Like, it felt like it started to become even bigger. And obviously,
Yep.
as you mentioned, there's some kind of crazy times. I guess we'll start with the Patriots side of things. Expectations have not probably been this low in New England in 30 years plus. Obviously, it's all about the coach, all about the quarterback. How have you kind of viewed expectations versus what they've played like the first 2 weeks? We know, again, the first couple weeks of the NFL season these days, because of lack of preseason, it is what it is.
They suck.
Yeah, but like, what are you kind of looking at from the Patriots the first 2 weeks? Have they impressed you? Or has it kind of been like, hard to tell? Where are you at with them so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think you honestly you have to say it's been impressive, and it's it's not impressive in the sense of like, man, this is going to be a great year, but it's impressive because of how low the expectations were. Like, I think you said it. It's been 30 years, maybe more of realistically sitting there being like, if they get to 7 wins, like that's a good year. Like that sounds crazy, but a lot of people I think had that kind of mindset going in. So you watch them go to Cincinnati and you see the way they play Cincinnati, and you're like, okay, they just kind of instilled their will on Cincinnati and made Cincinnati play their game, which, I think everyone was a little bit surprised because you're like, even Cincinnati on an off day and they don't have everything together, you expected them to rally, get something going, and eventually be able to come out and close out the game, and then follow it up. And they play Seattle at home, and it's a little bit of a back and forth, and they're playing. Next thing you know, Hunter Henry gets 100 yards receiving. The offensive line's not getting killed like in the preseason. So I think it's been impressive for the sense of now this game Thursday night against the Jets hasn't turned into like one of those games where I think everyone first was like, wow, we know it's a rivalry, we know it's the Patriots, but like the Jets should handle them pretty well. Now it's kind of like, I don't know, like this should be as good of a Thursday night game you can get early in the season. I think people are expecting to see two competitive teams that I think for the most part you would say have played pretty evenly of how they've been productive on the field. So I think it heads into like one of those kind of old school AFC East Jets Patriots games, especially the way both of these teams play right now. It's not high flying ball down the field. It's not that. So we might see a little 2010s, early 2000s smash mouth football, Sean Green, all of those guys just going at it, and I think very competitive.
Yeah, I was very proud of my Braylon Allen. It's going to be baby Sean Green during the draft process. Or during when the Jets drafted him, I feel better about it through 2 weeks. From a Jets perspective, when we talked, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months ago when you were on here, and I think the expectations are still very high. I just think that it almost, because we waited so long, because Aaron Rodgers we kind of forgot like what someone coming off an Achilles, having not played football in 2 years almost. It's looked good at times. I think it's looked very rusty at times. I think he's still, at least from my perspective, as camp went on, he started to trust his ankle and his Achilles more and more, and you see him move throughout the pocket. I still don't think we've seen him fully trust to like full speed. He ran for 2 yards, and Jeffrey Simmons chasing him down. I think
he didn't like that either.
Nah, Jeffrey Simmons called him a crybaby. He called him a crybaby back, the whole thing. I just think from the Jets' perspective, it was like defense, it's going to be amazing. The offense is going to take time. The offense has actually put up points or touchdowns. The defense has kind of struggled, started to get their groove. What have you made of them through 2 weeks? Again, 2 tougher opponents on the road. But what have you made of them through 2 weeks? Is it kind of what you expected, or like, not as much as I was hoping?
Week one wasn't what I expected. And it wasn't, I don't think it was an execution. I thought it was a mentality. I thought over the last few years, no matter what's happened at the quarterback position, the Jets defense had an attitude that even some games that might have got out of hand or whatever, they played a certain style, and they dominated certain things in the game. And I think when I turned on a San Francisco game and watched it back, I saw guys on TV talking about some scheme things, and schematically it seemed like they were in bad positions. But like, to me, when I've watched the Jets that hasn't mattered. You watch them just defeat blocks, and all gas, no brakes was that. It was everyone's getting to the ball. You can't block us. And I think that to me is what stuck out in the last 2 weeks of the plays that hit are, alignments, reaching one of the defensive linemen and turning them. And it's just like, that's not the Jets defense. So I think that for me, it was a surprising thing, just the way that they've kind of, gone out and performed from a energy, effort, and just straight, I'm going to dominate the individual across from me. But other than that, I think people forget of like this whole buildup goes on in the offseason of like, you just mentioned like Braylon Allen. You add Braylon Allen, it's like Breece Hall's going to be healthy. We're going to sign Mike Williams from the Chargers. And right away you think of everybody's highlights. And then you go into the season and you're just like, oh, Aaron Rodgers is going to throw it up to Mike Williams. Garrett Wilson's going to have 10 catches for 180. And you forget, like, this is the National Football League. Like, you don't just go out and this stuff just happen. You have to start to build and get better. Remember, none of these teams really play their guys in the preseason anymore. So, like, game speed, game time, all of those things. What are we going to check when they do this in the game? Like, how are you going to perform? How am I going to get used to the way you are on game day compared to how you are in practice? Like, all of those things, the Jets are still trying to kind of feel themselves and feel their way through that. And I think that's been the adjustment. But I didn't expect this team to be like, let's drop Aaron Rodgers back, 50 times and see how many yards he can throw for. Like, I expected them to gut it out, be a tough physical football team that you walk away and you say, I don't enjoy playing against the Jets. Their style, like, that's what I expected. And I would say so far they haven't done that aspect of it. I don't think Tennessee and, obviously San Francisco, I don't think they walked away saying, like, damn, if we got to play them again, we got to have a hell of a week of practice. We got to kind of lift a little bit extra weights because the way that they play, we got to prepare for.
Yeah, before we get into this matchup, I want to kind of just ask, not a nerd question, but just in terms of, like, I think a lot of what bothered me about the Jets defensively the first 6 quarters of the season, I think the second half they were much better. They give up 7 points, and it was on a Chuck Clark should have 9 times out of 10 the safety's picking that football. It doesn't happen. It is what it is. The Jets give up that 7 points there. I feel like defensively the first 6 quarters, specifically in the run game, was a lot of hero ball, and I want to kind of have you just talk about that because I felt like eyes wise, gaps, like just doing their responsibility. It felt like a lot of guys trying to cheat and jump a play to try to beat a tackle front side, or I'm gonna duck my head inside because I think this is where it's going and I want to make that splash play. I just feel like defensively, and again, you know this better than anybody, so you can talk about it, but like that's where I feel like they're getting gashed in the run game so much because it was a lot of like, oh, I know they're gonna run power to the right side, like I'm gonna try to beat the tackle across the face. And against San Francisco, a good running back's just going to cut back where the lane you just left. So can you just talk about, like, I don't know if you saw that. I felt like I saw that on tape way too much, especially week 1, not as much week 2, but you still saw it, far too much, I think, for the caliber of defense the Jets have.
Yeah, and I think every defense is different. And I know, like, my time in New England and playing there was all about building a wall, run defense. It wasn't about, one guy beating his block so bad because then it was what we used to call dip in, dip out lane of the back, just, slot, jump cuts left and then gets right back in that hole you should have been in. And I agree with you on the fact that, like, when you turn on San Francisco, way too many times it was either a guy up the field or a guy picking a side on a block of like, hey, I'm just going to go this way. And then the offensive lineman says, okay, cool. I'll just go with you that way. And it opens up a lane. So, and I think that's the hardest thing about when you watch other defenses or you watch defensive football is you don't know what's being taught. So sometimes you can see, like we used to have a go call. A linebacker could give a defensive lineman a go call. So, hey, Roger, or Rip, Liz. And that tells him, just go take that gap and go, and I'm going to run through the other gap. Well, the problem is if you do that and then the linebacker doesn't run through the gap he's supposed to, it looks like you're run. So that part is always hard to figure out. But I think the thing that to me used to jump out with their team was every guy where they need to be. So that, like, when the running back got the ball and he got up to the line of scrimmage, it was like he had to go lateral first. He had to turn and figure out, all right, there's no gap. So I think they have to get back to that, like building that wall. And, I think, Quentin Williams, to me, a couple times when I watched, he was the one guy, right? Knock back, moving down the line of scrimmage, throwing his guy out of the way. But that's the beauty of playing defense. You can have a dominant player inside, and they had a one against Tennessee that went off tackle. He gets off the block inside and he goes to go down the line to try to make the play, but somebody else gets sealed. And now all of a sudden he runs into their back or he tries to deepen his angle. Tony Pollard's down. He's in his 12-yard gain. So I think that is something that they have to get better at. And I think the hard thing now is you lose a guy like C.J. Mosley who, depending on how long he's out, like that's a tough part of playing defense, of losing a guy like that. But I think that also gives opportunity for some of the younger guys that you don't always know. Sometimes it feels like, man, we just lost this guy. He's going to go bad. And then the young guy gets in and you get to actually see him play. So I'm very interested to see, because they're going to get tested a lot Thursday night, because that's New England's bread and butter. It's going to be spread you out run game, get big running. Like that's what to me has been impressive, even with Alex Van Pelt, of he runs out of so many different formations and personnel groups that makes it a little bit harder as a defense to zero in on exactly what you're going to see.
Yeah, basically the 2019 Super Bowl game plan of run 12 and 13 personnel and having fullbacks and stuff like that, running playing slot and just I forget his name, whoever was your fullback for, it was like 42 maybe, whatever.
James Devlin.
Yeah, just like he was like lined up in the slot, just bowling over Nicole Roby
and
Coleman.
If you think about Cleveland, that's what they did a lot of last year with like Njoku and Bryant, like having those guys in there, and you go 13 personnel, 3 tight ends, and you're like, okay, here we go. And then they come out and you're like, oh, dang, it's a 3 wide receiver set. How are we going to adjust? We're big people. And that's what, to me, Van Pelt has done a good job, especially going from Cincinnati where they ran the ball really well. So obviously Seattle came in thinking, all right, we're going to stop. And they ran out of different formations that gave them a little bit of an edge to still be able to run the ball.
Yeah, I guess kind of last question on this matchup here. How do you feel like the Jets kind of try to attack this New England defense? Because, again, it's not necessarily the Bill defense of like, I don't know how much it's going to be week by week. A lot of teams, the Jets are a team that plays kind of their style no matter who they play. And, Bill was kind of like every opponent was different. Obviously you guys love doing a lot of, man zero blitzes and a lot of different things like that. But generally speaking, it was opponent by opponent. How do you feel like they attack this Jets defense? Because this Jets offense, because I feel like Tennessee was like light box, sit and cover 2 and keep everything short. And it kind of ended up costing them in the end because Rodgers is a guy that like
can't do that against him.
You can't do that against him. I almost feel like if you're New England, you want to try to move it, try to get Aaron Rodgers off his spot at this point in his career. But then you're leaving Garrett Wilson one-on-one. As good as Christian Gonzalez is or Mike Williams, like, I guess how, if you were, Gerard Mayo and company, how are you attacking this Jets offense to try to have success? Or if you're the Jets offense, how are you attacking New England?
Yeah, I think if I'm New England, I'm spinning the dial. Like we're not going to sit in any one thing. We're going to play man matches and play zone. We're going to play zone matches and play man. Like we want each time Aaron Rodgers goes back to the sideline and he sits down with Hackett, we want him to think that there's something new coming at him. We want to save some calls for the second half that he didn't see in the first half. So when they go back in halftime and they have some extra time and they plan and they're like, all right, this is what we're seeing. We want to open the half with some new calls that now they have to go back to the sideline and say, hey, they threw that out from the first half. They're not doing that. And then later in the third quarter, early fourth quarter, we want to bring back some of those first quarter calls and try to hit home too. So I think the way New England has played throughout the season, if I'm the Jets, I'm thinking we want to attack on early downs. They play more zone on early downs, whether it's a fire zone, whether it's cover 2 high safeties. Like I'm thinking like that's when I want to get the ball down the field. I think when you turn on the Seattle game, a lot of Seattle's passing yards came in more of the zone defenses where they were able to displace the zones a little bit, get guys deep, guys intermediate, guys short, and now you're stretching the zone. So even if I throw it to Breece Hall for 5 yards, he can go get another 10 because of how deep some of those zones are. So I think one of the things that New England's going to have to do when the Jets will balance it is when New England brings the pressure and you decide to go blitz zero, when you play those guys, you play the dogs at quarterback, you got to know when to sprinkle it in. And on the reverse side of that, Aaron Rodgers, I know because I played against him, when he figures it out and he gives it to you and now he knows it's trouble. So I think the Jets have to be thinking, all right, like they know that Aaron Rodgers is that good of figuring things out. They're going to sprinkle it in. When they do, we got to do what Seattle did. Seattle saw the blitz coming. Geno Smith brought in the tight end in motion, caught the Patriots off guard because instead of lining up to run another route, he motions in fast. He blocks one of the blitzers. The defense is not ready. They think the ball's coming out fast. DK Metcalf down the sideline. That's a situation where you're like, hey, we don't know how many times they're going to call this pressure, but when they do, we got to be able to execute and hit home. So I think it has to be a balance. And I think ultimately the Jets have to get other people involved. I think right now, playing against New England, if they come out and they think we're going to Garrett Wilson left, Garrett Wilson right, and then Breece Hall, the one thing I know from being in New England, even without Bill there, they are zeroed in on those 2 guys. They know, hey, if we take those 2 guys away, and that could be a mix of anything. That can be Christian Gonzalez on Mike Williams, a double team on Garrett Wilson. Like Bill talked about that on a podcast or something last week.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah.
That's what we did. My time in New England, we put, whether it was Revis, whether it was Gilmore, whether it was Talib, it was a lot of, hey, you take their number 2, we're going to double their number 1, and we're going to go from there. So I think the Patriots have that Rolodex. They have so many different things, and they still do. They're always going to be a little bit of a game plan defense. I don't think it's as much when Bill was there. But I think the Jets, watching them against Tennessee, Braylon Allen is a really good football player. I'm running more two-back. I like the play against Tennessee he scores on. They run it earlier. They throw it to Breece Hall. If I'm Tennessee, I'm like, well, we saw this against San Francisco, beat Breece Hall to the flat. You just showed it to us again. They set it up. They fake it, run the screen to Braylon out. And once he gets going, secondary guys don't want to tackle him. So I look for him and Mike Williams to just some more design plays. Not like I think sometimes when you say that, you're like, yeah, Aaron Rodgers throw him the ball. No, like let's design some things to get other people involved so the defense now thinks about, hey, we got to be prepared to stop this too, not just those other 2 guys.
Yeah, last kind of thing on Jets pass. Just want to, or this game, I guess specifically, the trend around the NFL, obviously, right now, as we kind of mentioned a little earlier, is a lot of too high shell, a lot of trying to, and teams, all the numbers are down quarterback wise, everything around the league. It's been a trend, and this year is the first couple of weeks. It's been stark, right? Like Mahomes threw for 150, Rodgers threw for 170. Like I think the leading passer in the league is Brock Purdy with like 500 yards, 550 yards through 2 weeks, which I'm not saying is not a lot, but like
it's usually like 800 yards or
5 years ago, it was, we had, I think 4,000 or 5,000 yard passers. So I guess just from a Jets perspective, you kind of just hit on this, but how big of an advantage is the fact that the Jets are a team that they're built around their backs and then a quarterback that's not going to fall for kind of the bullshit that defensive coordinators are going to try to throw at you? Because I think a lot of why these rookie quarterbacks are struggling is like, you're just refusing to take 7 yards a pop. Like if you have 7 yards to play, like you're going to score a shit ton of points in this league. And is that kind of, do you feel like that plays into the Jets' hands? I know defensively probably it doesn't because the Jets aren't a too high shell team that just like they're not a big personnel team. They want to beat you with speed and teams passing. But offensively, I think for the first time in maybe my lifetime, the Jets offense has a chance to actually benefit from where the league is, as a whole. Is that fair to kind of categorize it as?
Yeah, and I think it will be predicated on what Aaron Rodgers sees, right? I think the idea defenses have really formed into recently is make teams make 10, 12, 15 play drives. Let's see how many times the quarterback is going to see too high and run the ball. And then let's mix in where we look too high, where we bring pressure and we kind of have a run blitz because we know you're going to run against our too high. Like I think that has been the key of what teams have been trying to do. So if you ask me if I'm the Jets, do I feel pretty good about that? Hell yeah, I feel good about that, of having a guy who's seen every defense under center. For me, like I would feel good of like he's going to stay consistent. If you catch him in a call and you get him, like that's not going to bother him. That's happened to him before. He still should stay dedicated to, all right, this is what I see, too high, we're going to run, or too high, we're going to stay front side, and I'm going to work the 3-man side instead of going backside to the 2-on-1 side for the defense. So I think you have a guy like Aaron Rodgers, you believe like, hey, if somebody comes in and they say, this is our plan and this is what we're doing, and we get to watch that a week ahead of time, 2 weeks ahead of time, your last 2 games, you run the same defense, you're like, it's going to be tough. There's still some guys in the league. I think Joe Burrow's like that. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, like some of these guys, Matt Stafford, those old school guys of you can't play zone against Aaron Rodgers all game. You just can't. Like, I don't care how scary their receivers are. You got to go and do something, or he'll just kill you slowly. It'll just be a slow death, taking the ball down the field, hitting it there, going there, go. It's like when, we used to play Peyton Manning. You knew you had to switch up things, but you also knew you had to force him to kind of go at his own pace. And I remember playing against Peyton. I think that's where some of this stuff has started. Playing against Peyton, we used to be like, hey, force him to run the ball. Let's see how many times these guys are going to just stick to the run and not want to throw the ball. And I think that's what these quarterbacks are going through right now. Everyone wants to see offense. A lot of offensive-minded head coaches out there, these great offensive coordinators. Okay, let's see if you want to do the most boring thing in the league and just hand the ball off to your back. And we've seen it from some teams through these first 2 weeks. Some of these running backs, Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs, some of these guys are having big games. Kamara just had a huge game. But I'm anxious to see how much do offenses stick to running the ball.
Yeah, it's hard to be patient. It's probably one of the hardest things, and teams abandon the run right away. I think that part of the reason, it works in the regular season a lot, but in the playoffs, we saw it. The Steelers every time they come to New England in the playoffs, they're just sitting three high. They're just sitting cover three for 80 straight plays, and it's like, dude, Tom's gonna figure it out, buddy.
Yep.
Like switch, do something different because this
Yep.
isn't working. Everyone used to be like, why is this team so talented? Why can't they win in New England? Well, they play the same goddamn coverage against the best player that's ever played in the league for an entire game. I guess last kind of fun one here. Obviously, you played in a lot. You've referenced a lot of kind of the Jets Pats memories. Is there any one that maybe is like kind of a low key one? Like we can avoid the Jets 2010, and maybe we'll avoid breaking Zach's brain a couple years ago. Is there any other ones for you, or like one specific moment that like was either like it could have been good for you, it could have been good for the Jets, doesn't matter, but like one kind of like funny or like one Jets Pats memory that sticks out, I guess.
There's a lot, but I remember my rookie year. We opened the season, Cincinnati, Chad Johnson, Terrell Owens, and go out there, play a decent game. I'm like, okay, and go to the Jets, and it's I think Braylon Edwards was there at that time, and Jericho Cotchery. And as a young guy growing up in New York, New Jersey, I knew his name, but I'm like, it's not Chad, it's not T.O.
No.
And Jericho Cotchery killed me. And anybody who played DB late 2000s, 2010s, like Jericho Cotchery was known in the league as if you wasn't on it, he would route you up. Kind of like how Doug Baldwin became not always a huge name to everybody, but DBs knew like releases, route running. And then the other one is, I can't remember the exact year, but it was the one where the Jets kicked the field goal and it kind of went right over the one of the uprights. And it was like, did it go in? Did it not go in? And then we got called for like leveraging. It was like such a mess. It was Geno Smith at quarterback, which was like a game, again, like we talked about. As much as we might have won games, like those games stick out. It was like a heartbreaker, them beating us. It might have been overtime. I don't remember. But it was like one of those Geno Smith led teams that, shout out Geno Smith because, it seems like the Jets quarterbacks start there and then end up somewhere else and get their career going. And now all of a sudden they're good quarterbacks. Sam Darnold looks like he's heading that way now too. But just some pretty cool memories. And the good thing is, as a player, you like when you have more good memories about playing a team than bad memories. So
Yeah, no, the Safarian Jenkins fumble stands
oh,
out. That was crazy. Before your time, obviously. The Mangini Belichick handshake after the game in New England's one of the crazier things. Obviously, Bill got Eric up out of the league quickly. But that's the podcast for another time. Devin, obviously appreciate you taking some time. Hopefully, now that you've retired, the tides will turn. A little bit. The Jets are on a one-game win streak against the Pats. Haven't said that in literally like a decade.
I
So
picked the Jets to win the division. So I'm hoping to see them win some games and go and do it. So I do think this will be a fun game Thursday night. I think both these teams realize like what the division is. Miami's probably not going to be what we thought, and I think Buffalo's going to be a little bit better than people thought coming in. So I think both teams. I think the Jets obviously already thought that, but I think now the Patriots are sitting there like, hey, like why can't we sneak in here and get maybe 9, 10 wins? Like I think they're starting to see things that way compared to how a lot of people thought of them coming in. I think they probably have to see this game as like this is a team we know very well. They haven't played as good as everyone thought. Like this will be huge for us to get a break after we can go down to MetLife and beat them. So and I'm sure the Jets are thinking the opposite of like let's get rolling. Let's start stringing some wins together.
yeah, no, appreciate it. Obviously, you hopping on. Make sure you guys are catching Devin on the pod and on NBC, and then Pro Football Talk, and then obviously on Sundays. We'll be doing the game tomorrow. Appreciate it, obviously, and we'll have to have you on soon.
Yeah, man. Good talking to you.